But now we have Mount St. Helens, and we have ours, that we can create canyons that are 700 feet deep. Now the Grand Canyon itself, what, 18 miles wide, 250 miles long, and 1 mile deep. And now what they say is that the Grand Canyon had a very large lake sitting up just to the north and to the east, and a debris bridge broke and carved out that entire canyon and did it probably in just a few days. And I'll show you something here. Here is Puallup Falls, here in eastern Washington. 180 foot drop from the top to the bottom. Puallup Falls was created by something else more gargantuan. The Missoula flood. You've heard of the Missoula flood? Gentleman by Mr. Betts was a geologist in 1923. He roamed all over eastern Washington and all the scabland areas and trying to explain these geologically, and he came up with the unorthodox opinion that all of these things that he's looking at was caused by a gargantuan flood, a limited flood, but a flood that washed down through eastern Washington all the way out into the Portland area and into the ocean. And he was just about laughed out of his license to be a human. Nobody wanted to believe him. For years, this man studied this, and guess what? The Missoula Lake was sitting up in Missoula, and you had the panhandle of, just the panhandle, very thin part of Idaho, and you had the Clark Fork River that suddenly became blocked. It became blocked many years ago, right after the Ice Age started melting back. And I'm going to talk to you about the Ice Age in much more detail tomorrow. But when it melted back, there was a great, big, huge dam. It's an ice dam. And the Missoula Lake backed up such that this ice dam from the top to the bottom was over 2,500 feet. That's a tall, long ice dam. Water backing up, it was 1/5 the size of Lake Michigan. 1/5 the size. 500 cubic miles of water was sitting in this when the ice dam broke. Okay, there are some very good videos, a couple of them made by Nova, that talk about this, and they have some very nice graphics showing you how this happened. When the ice dam broke, 380 cubic miles of water poured out over 2 days with 200-foot tall front of water washing down through eastern Washington, and it carved out everything that you see in eastern Washington, from the Moses Lake potholes to all the canyons to the Puallup Falls. The Puallup Falls now has a 6-mile canyon that it travels all the way out into the Snake River, and its distance is 140 feet through solid rock. Well, that was all done in one catastrophic event that occurred, and all the geologists agree now that that's what it was. And it has occurred a couple more times since. It does not take millions of years to see these kind of things happen. God has given numerous examples, and all you have to do is look at the science. Now, I'll tell you, the evolutionist is a uniformitarianist. By that, the evolutionist says that everything is uniform. What I see occurring today occurred in the past. If I see that water drips at this certain rate, then it dripped at that certain rate in the past. And that's simplistic. But what I'm saying is that you look at how much erosion is going on right now into the lakes and into the rivers and into the ocean, then they extrapolate backward and make decisions about how old the earth is, not taking into account that it's not uniform. What happened in the past is not what's happening today, and they're not taking into account the flood. They noticed when they came to Spirit Lake that little twigs were floating upright in the lake. Dr. Steve Austin obtained his PhD from Tennessee, and into the water, and that these trees would bloat and drop out at different stages of time. So here's one that just now dropped out. Here's one that dropped out earlier, one a little later. Here's one that just laid down. This was his proposal. And he came up with this proposal in the bathtub. Okay, he submitted his PhD from bathtub experiments. I'm sure he got a lot of boat floating stories, duckings, and all kinds of stuff. It had to have been a horrible experience. But 1979 is when he got his PhD. 1980, Mount St. Helens erupts. So guess who's right there? Dr. Austin. And he's taken the helicopter, and here's a couple upright logs. You know, that's kind of discouraging. I see two. But look at the logs very carefully now. Just look at them, look at the logs. And let's see what the next thing. Here's a whole bunch more right here. They're all tilted. When they drained part of Spirit Lake through Haley's Ridge, it sucked the water down such that some of the logs kind of tilted. So that's why you got a little bit of a tilt. So here's the experiment. It's 1985. This is Harold Coffin and John Morris, and they have an ugly little boat. They have a sonar toefish, and they have the awfulest pants that any man could ever wear. I don't remember seeing anything like that in 1985. But they're scientists, so can they help it? So they took their little boat as people were watching them, and they went out onto they went out onto Spirit Lake. And now they're going to tow that little toefish. It's a sonar toefish. They're getting a sonar picture of the lake. And so they look at the lake, and these shadows are logs. And here they see some logs, some of which went way down and landed on the surface of the bottom of the lake. Other logs, like this one right here, was down, but not completely below. And the lake itself was about 150 feet deep. So that gives you a little rough idea. After they extrapolated and looked at this, what they came up with is that, looking at the sonar, that this lake had anywhere between 20 and 40,000 upright trees planted on the bottom, buried at different intervals. Every time the tree went down and then the mountain exploded and threw out more debris and ash, it would bury a part of that tree. So the tree stops here, then it gets buried a little more, another explosion buries it here, buries it here. And this is very important to understand why they're looking at this and why it's something that really has all the geologists concerned. So they decide to go down. This is Dr. Steve Austin, Barry Dunsforth. They're going to go down and they're going to dive. What they found, first of all, as they went underneath, is that there were sequential falling out of the logs. They found that the noble fir was one of the first logs to saturate and fall out. Now, the logs fell out roots down. Didn't fall out head down. They fell out roots down. Noble firs were the first ones to kind of succumb and fall, and sink, I should say. Then came the western hemlock, and the very last trees were the Douglas fir. And then they had some other species of trees in the middle there that would fall out. So they get ready, they dive down, they look up. Here's the log map. This is a 6-foot diameter log. And this is very dangerous. You take enough, you must take enough air to go down. You don't stick your head up in between and see where you are. That's a moving log map. So as they look out now what do you see? You can't see them from the top. You go down and you start looking at them and you go, whoa, there's a lot of upright logs that have already started sinking in various, you could go around and you might have 20, 30, 40 feet of water above you, and then you've got another 120 feet below you. And so these gentlemen went down and they found, this is a real good example of one of their pictures. They found 3 trees. And it's kind of hard to see, trust me. That's a root. That's a little bit of a root from this tree. These are 3 trees representing the fact that one of the trees was completely buried. One went completely, I'm sorry, this one went completely down, it was buried. Another one was just touching the surface, and this one here hadn't quite touched the surface. It's just floating like that, in limbo. So, as the mountain kept exploding, this tree keeps getting buried more. This one will sink down, and it might be 20 feet above this tree when its roots finally hit and start to get buried too. Very important. They looked at the roots of the tree. Now that's a root. It's not a tree. It's not the tree. It's the root. And they noticed that the roots of the majority, the vast majority of these trees, the roots were broken off about 3 feet from the trunk. Snapped off. They did not taper out like you would expect if somebody came to the tree and uprooted them. Okay? They weren't, there wasn't a whole root system. It looked like somebody just snapped the tree off just right below its roots. Now I'm going to read something to you. This is in Yellowstone, a sign that says, across the valley rise the slopes of Specimen Ridge. But the forest you see there today is only the latest chapter in a remarkable story. Buried within the volcanic rocks that compose the mountain are 27 distinct layers of fossil forests, that flourished 50 million years ago. Okay? And then just over here on the smaller one, it goes on to say sporadic volcanic eruptions occurring over a period of about 20,000 years buried many successive forests under blankets of ash and volcanic debris. Many stumps still stand upright in the same sites where they grew millions of years ago. Okay? This is embarrassing. If I were a geologist, I would be getting a little upset at me. All right. Here's Specimen Ridge. Here's the very top of Specimen Ridge. Here's the new forest. What they're saying is that you creationists, here are 27 forests. How long does it take to grow a forest? You know, and we're going, no, the flood did that. And you know, the water, the mat theory, and the logs went down, and successive layers after the flood, one layer after another is poured down. We ended up with this montage of trees and forests. And they said that's not possible. It took 50 million years to make all 27 layers as you go down. So we went up. And here's one of our scientists. And he's looking at some of these buried trees that erosion has opened up. And they went around to the opened trees that had been buried, but erosion had opened up so you could study it. And they looked particularly at the root system. What do you think they saw? They noticed that the vast majority of these trees on top of Specimen Ridge had their roots cut off at about 3 feet from the trunk. Okay? Now that's embarrassing. And so they looked at this and said, we have a pretty viable theory here. That we have Mount St. Helens in a laboratory that shows us that there is an alternative theory to how Specimen Ridge was created and made. You don't need to believe in millions of years. You just need to believe in a flood. A flood that is gargantuan, bigger than we've ever seen. It was worldwide. Why does the evolutionist want to put the flood someplace out in the Bosporus or the Dardanelles or someplace in the Black Sea or someplace? Why? Because that won't explain all the geologic change that this earth has to show. A worldwide flood gives you evidence, it gives you substance as you see it here. Last thing I want to talk to you about, coal.